Just ask Aled to give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen. Can you see my screen, Aled? Excellent. Good. Right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Magenta's budget webinar and update. Of course, yesterday, the long-awaited budget was announced. I feel like we've been waiting for it for months and months. So, you know, since the summer, it seems like a really long time, with lots and lots of questions asked in the meantime. But of course, it was the first Labour budget in almost 15 years, and Rachel Reeves' first budget, the first female chancellor, which I think, whatever your political persuasion and thinking around everything, is that actually it should really be celebrated, that women can and girls can look at Rachel Reeves and see that as an amazing position to have gotten to. So as I say, whatever you think about what she says, I think that should be celebrated a little. But that's not what I'm here to cover today. I'm going to start off I guess by just letting you know, of course, that Aled's going to be talking with me today as well. Aled's our junior planner here at Magenta and a massive support to me and the team. Tries to keep us up to date technically as he possibly can, make sure that I am as well, and whilst I'm juggling lots of other things. And so I'm really pleased to have him here talking today for a couple of slides specifically about the biggest changes that we have seen announced. I would just also caveat that, you know, this happened yesterday. Some legislation is very, very complicated and will not actually be released for some time yet. So some details are not available. So we're going to give you as much information as we can, but noting that actually some of this is going to need to be followed up, because we some of the pension legislation in particular we just won't know about until January at least. So we'll cover off most things, but that's just a little bit of I guess a warning that, to be honest, we're still digesting that information, and so too is the profession, to be able to understand exactly what's going on. So moving on then, this image does not look like I was expecting it to, which is a shame. But anyway, I'll just talk about, you can imagine that this was a bingo card. There was 30 different options on it. And actually, when we were playing that bingo yesterday with the team, only 6 of those potential rumours and things that could have been announced by Rachel Reeves came to light. So the main thing I think we should focus on is actually there was some good news that came out of this budget. There was no changes to pension contributions and pension relief. There was no changes to ISAs. We were worried about whether that might happen and ISAs might be capped. People would suddenly need to pay more tax on their ISA savings. There was no change to the IHT, the inheritance tax rate itself, whilst there was changes around assets coming back into the estate. There was actually no change to the rate, and they didn't change the residence nil rate band, which I felt was actually quite a low-hanging fruit, and they didn't go for that. So all of those things were positive. No increase to dividend tax and no change on pension tax-free cash. Pension tax-free cash was a massive thing in the last couple of weeks. People across the profession that I was in contact with telling me that people were really panicking and demanding to have their tax-free cash out. And luckily, all of our clients were really well trained, and I didn't have any calls of that. I think we had one call of that nature, but otherwise, everyone else kind of stuck to their, we won't know until it happens. And that overall, I think, must be the story coming out of this budget. It was the most kind of rumor fueled budget for many years, and the messaging of we won't act until we actually know what's happening definitely seems to have played out here. The one thing I would say that we did work on was about capital gains tax, and those of you that are watching who have large general investment accounts where we had significant gains, we did do some work in advance, knowing that the rate was likely to go up, and I think that was still the right move. Rates have gone up. We are going to find that you were better off for doing that before. But anyway, I'm sorry my budget bingo card didn't work, because that was actually quite fun. But yeah, out of 30 possible potential changes, only 6 of those actually came to some fruition, and some of those weren't actually scrapped like expected. They were just amended. So just to talk through a general overview, we did send an email yesterday with the general overview, but I just wanted to cover off some of these things again. Obviously, the biggie for employers and companies is going to be this rise in employer NI contributions. The threshold from which you would pay employer NI is going down, although the employment allowance is going up. That's the amount that you can, that kind of offsets that NI slightly. I think the big thing there is that smaller companies might not feel, small companies might not feel much difference. Big companies are still going to feel quite a significant difference on that NI contributions. And of course, the minimum wage went up. So it's kind of a double whammy for maybe certain criteria of companies. The end to the freeze on income tax thresholds, that was agreed that the income tax threshold freeze will end in 2028. We'll start to see those thresholds change. Capital gains tax reforms. This is one of the most significant ones. It was highly anticipated. I don't think it's come to us as a surprise for anyone that the basic rate of capital gains tax has gone up, and also the higher rate of tax has gone up. But Aled will talk a little bit more about capital gains tax in a moment. Changes to inheritance tax. Of course, as I said, the good news piece is it's still at 40%, not higher, and you still potentially have a residence nil rate band. But bringing pensions back into inheritance tax legislation is significant. We have been, since pension reform in 2015, we've generally been planning around pensions being outside of the estate, being the last thing that you would draw on if you were in a drawdown situation from, say, ISAs, general investment account and pension. And it is going to change potentially the structure of the planning that we are doing. All I would say is that I'm not rushing on that. We don't even know the full legislation, and certainly changes won't be instant. So we will talk a little bit more about that in a moment as well. ISAs remaining unchanged. That means your 20,000 that you can put into ISAs every year remains. The lifetime ISA remains, which is the 4,000 that younger people can use towards their first property. That forms part of the 20,000, of course. And the junior ISAs, if you want to help fund children's futures and grandchildren's futures, the junior ISA, which is a tax-free ISA for people under 16, with a £9,000 limit, still exists. There's a freeze in fuel duty, and I should also add, which I didn't put on there, is that all the incentives for electric cars, especially through businesses in regards to P11D benefits and corporation tax relief, has continued. There's an increase in the second home stamp duty that will be applied if you buy a second property. That rises from 3% to 5%. There is still the allowance that if you're only doing that for a short period of time and you intend to go back down to one property as your main residence, that you'll be able to claim back that difference. I believe it's as long as it's as quick as 3 years. I don't think that that's changed. I haven't read anything that has changed. They've introduced, as highly anticipated, the VAT on private school fees. So that will go ahead. I haven't included any detail in this today because it doesn't apply to that many people that I felt were going to be listening. But if you would like further information, then of course we can deliver that. The state pension, many people will be pleased to know, the triple lock increase was announced, 4.1%, I believe. Yeah, my notes say 4.1, 4.1%. So that's an increase due in April to anyone with their state pension. And then finally, confirmation that there will be no British ISA. Jeremy Hunt, if you remember, a few months ago had, I think it might have been in the spring, I can't quite remember, said that there might be this extra ISA allowance called the British ISA that has been scrapped. We didn't know any detail about it, and we thought it would be scrapped. So there we go. So what we thought would be good for this afternoon is to just focus on 3 areas though, and these ones are what I believe will be the most pertinent to our clients and things that we'll be talking about going forward. So the first one being capital gains tax, second is inheritance tax, and third is pensions. Pensions and inheritance tax are now a lot more linked, and we'll probably cover that off all in one. But it is quite important just to recognise that when we're talking about pensions, we are talking about personal pensions, defined contribution pensions, not defined benefit pensions. And especially those defined benefit pensions that are already, if you're already retired, this certainly will have absolutely no impact on anything to do with those pensions. Aled will probably reiterate that because it was something we wanted to make sure we covered. Anyway, so I'm going to pass over to Aled now. He's going to talk about the details around some of the capital gains tax changes and around inheritance tax.
Perfect. Thank you, Gretchen, and good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, I'll touch upon both capital gains and inheritance tax. So as expected, the Chancellor did announce that there will be increases in capital gains tax. So for basic rate of capital gains, this was increased from 10% to 18%. And for higher rate capital gains, this was increased from 20% to 24%. It's important to note that actually these rates came into play from yesterday, so they are already live. However, if you have already realised gains in this tax year, we want to reiterate that those rates at that time, those lower tax rates would be the tax rates that you'll be paying on any gains made before yesterday. So these new rates are only applicable for any gains made from yesterday onwards. And we were quite pleased actually from hearing the budget, because in anticipation to the budget, I think, as you mentioned, Gretchen, in terms of we were expecting that the capital gains tax rates may be in line with income tax rates moving forward, or quite substantially higher than we currently have. So actually, when we saw that when capital gains tax rates increased to 18 and 24, in some ways we were slightly relieved, because we had anticipated that rates may be higher than this. We were also pleased to see that the annual exemption remains in place at £3,000. So as a reminder to anyone who may not be aware, the annual exemption is the amount of gains that you can realise each tax year before any tax is due. And again, there were rumours that this may be removed, but we were pretty pleased to see that this hasn't been touched and this remains in place. And the Chancellor also noted that there'll be some changes made to a relief called the Business Asset Disposal Relief. So this relief provides a more beneficial rate of capital gains for the first £1 million of gains where a business is sold. This is currently at 10%. And will remain 10% for the rest of the tax year. But from April 25, this will increase to 14% and will then increase again to 18% from April 26 and remain at that level. If you can carry on, Gretchen. Thank you. And then just summarising a few of these inheritance tax changes. So I think as you've said, Gretchen, in terms of the key point from an inheritance tax point of view is there was no change to the underlying rates, and there was no change to the thresholds. As you said, in terms of we were concerned that the residence nil rate band may be removed, but this wasn't the case. It's also important to note that there were no changes to any of the gifting allowances. Again, we were slightly concerned whether the 7-year gifting rule may be extended to 10 years or even greater than this, but there have been no changes made to any of the gifting rules. There were changes made to agricultural property relief or business relief. So any assets that currently qualify for either of these reliefs are currently fully exempt from inheritance tax. From April 26, this will only be limited to £1 million, with anything above this being taxed at a lower inheritance tax rate of 20%. The Chancellor also made some changes to something called called shares that aren't recognised in aren't listed in any recognised stock exchange. And the most common share that's currently being talked about is the AIM market, or the AIM investments that some clients have. So currently, if clients such as you have investments in an AIM market, they are currently fully exempt from IHT. But again, from April 2026, they will be forming part of the estate, but be taxed at 20%. We're also aware that some clients have investments in things such as EIS, enterprise investment schemes, or inheritance tax solutions with providers such as Time or Octopus. I just want to reassure that we're currently in discussions with all the providers for us to understand exactly what is the tax position for all of these moving forward. And then just touching on pensions, as you say, Gretchen, this is probably the biggest change from an individual point of view, where pensions will now be forming part of an individual's estate. Where currently they are exempt, from 2027, any pension funds that haven't been used on death could be subject to IHT. It's important to note that the spousal exemption remains in place. So if any pensions are passed to a spouse or a civil partner, they will remain exempt from IHT. But anything else could be subject to IHT moving forward. It's important to note that there is a consultation going on at the moment, and we will not know the full details of what will be happening with pensions until at least January 2025. And also just want to note that from a DB pensions point of view, so if you do have a DB pension in place, from our current understanding is we don't think it will be subject to IHT, but we will continue to wait for further details to understand exactly how these will be treated moving forward.
Thanks, Aled. Someone's ringing our doorbell, which is helpful. Sorry about that, everyone. Aled, can you just take over? I'm going to have to... I'm very sorry, everyone. I tried everything to make sure nothing interrupted this. The phone's off. We're all locked in our rooms, etc. But typical, no one ever rings on my office doorbell, but that happened today. So I'm so sorry about that. Anyway, we're back now. Let's talk about, you can tell it's live, can't you? Right, changes to planning. I mean, I just wanted to give a little bit of an initial thoughts here around how things may change. Most of that is going to be in connection to those two things that we've just talked about around capital gains tax and inheritance tax. So just to really touch on quickly on the capital gains tax situation, what we've already done and what might happen around the way that we might look at your personalized financial planning. So anyone who's got a large amount of money sat in what we would call a general investment account, that means that it's not wrapped in an ISA, it's not wrapped in a pension, it is taxable to, its dividends are taxed, its interest is taxed, and it's subject to capital gains tax when you crystallize a gain. So maybe when you take a withdrawal or you make an investment change, that triggers a gain in that portfolio. There aren't, the majority of people, what we try to do is utilize ISAs and pensions and other tax saving wrappers. But sometimes that general investment account is really the only other option that we've got. I think what we try to do with people who have those portfolios, and we've already been talking about it already, is Are we better off staying there, or are we better off looking at a different investment vehicle? The alternative potentially is something called an investment bond. All of the people that are already our clients who have general investment accounts, we've already been through that analysis. We've tried to talk to everyone about it. If we haven't spoken to you, it's because you are better off staying where you are. And that was given that we thought rates were going to increase significantly and over and above where they have gone to. So I am still absolutely sure that the majority of cases a general investment account will still offer a good home despite the capital gains tax. But what we'll be doing as part of your ongoing service and reviews is always double checking those things. Are you better off where you are? Is there an alternative that we could be discussing? But of course, it's all personalised depending on whether you're in withdrawal, whether you take withdrawals, whether it's there just accumulating, and what your tax bracket is likely to be when you do start to need those withdrawals. So it is a very personalised calculation and assessment that we need to take. But the good news is, as Aled said, the annual exemption is still there. We can still utilise that a lot for the majority of things that we might need to do, but we will make sure that we continue to monitor that going forward and make any recommendations that we think are suitable. In regards to inheritance tax and pensions, it is a bit of a blow, given that pension reform in 2015 suddenly opened this opportunity for funding into pensions to pass down to generations. As Aled has already said, if you've got a pension, a personal private pension, it will still be able to be inherited by your spouse without any inheritance tax. That spousal exemption still exists. It's only that second potential inheritance scenario that really is being impacted. So maybe if the intention was to leave that pension to your children. Now, really, a pension is designed to pay you an income in retirement. And I think that's what Rachel Reeves has decided to go with. It's not really ever designed, wasn't really ever designed as an inheritance tax saving vehicle. It was designed to ensure that everyone had a good standard of living. There's still significant advantages to pensions. You get significant tax relief going in, and it grows tax-free. So I think in principle, it's important when we will be thinking about this with clients to assess what's important to you. And that's what we do anyway, but we'll be revisiting it. What's the priority? How do you feel about lifetime gifting? The reality is that it might be that we have to change the intention. If you would like your children to inherit money and you don't need this money to provide yourself with a good standard of living and spend on everything you want to spend on, is it that you give in your lifetime more using a variety of different options that we've got? Gifts from income, for example, almost give with a warm hand and see that benefit to the people that you want to receive this money longer term, rather than it all happening upon death. So pensions are really the ones that are going to be impacted. There are a couple of other things that might come back into our planning sphere, there used to be, and there still is, something that's called a spousal bypass trust. It effectively bypasses your spouse. Your pension doesn't go to your spouse, and it's bypassed to your children in trust, under trust. It's complicated, but I have no doubt it will come back into play now that these rules are not as straightforward as they were previously. There is a couple of other things. It might be that it could be of benefit to draw from pensions and consider business relief, which is going to have £1 million outside of inheritance, availability outside of inheritance tax. So it's all going to be very bespoke. I'm only going to be able to advise you on a very one-to-one basis, and we will have to take time to work through the scenarios that we find ourselves in with people that it has a knock-on effect to for their estate. The main thing is that pension legislation takes a long time to get sorted. The legislation itself, it won't actually be finalised until January 25, and the rules won't even then come into play until 2027. So right now, there is nothing that we would recommend that we do, because at the moment, the previous rules still apply, and certainly beneficiaries that are nominated, many of you will resonate and understand that previously we've talked about nominating spouse and children to ensure that benefits can pass on. They might need changing and amending, but we've got until 2027 to make sure that we've come up with a personalised plan for you that's suitable. So I guess my overall message is there certainly is there has been changes that require planning and that need to be looked at. They may well mean that more inheritance tax is payable by the largest of estates and by those that have got large amounts in pensions, but it might be that there are other solutions, including, as I say, gifts from income rule, which fall outside of inheritance tax, business relief and other opportunities, and as I say, gifting in your lifetime. So we'll be wanting to talk to anyone in that camp about what's really important and reevaluating that in line with the changing rules. So overall, I think that is everything that Aled and I had plans to talk about. As I say, some of that legislation is not yet out there. There's been no changes to trust rules, so anything like that you might already have, any gifts you've already made, those things are not being impacted by anything that has been announced by Rachel. So I'll ask Aled if there's any Q&A in the box. Hopefully I've covered everything. I didn't expect there to be loads of questions because I was hoping that, you know, we will have covered everything. By all means, if you are watching this back on replay and have a question, then do fire it through to us and we will endeavour to answer that when we're able to. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank anyone who has come and watched it live, and as I say, any questions you can always submit to either myself or hello@magentafp.com. I'll stop this share so that I can just check that everyone else is okay. But yes, short and sweet, everyone, because it was not too many significant things to report. Out of the 30, only 6 that we needed to think about. So thank you so much for joining me today, and to Aled for helping me present. And any questions, as I say, submit them, and I will see you all soon.